Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next instalment of the Python Live webinar series, hosted by myself and Amicus Recruitment. I'm Jordan Hayward, and if you haven't heard of us before, Amicus Recruitment specialises in recruiting across three key areas of IT, including Python, Golang and JavaScript. Now, today I'm joined by a fantastic guest, Will Hayes from Iwoca. Now, Iwoca are one of the most exciting tech companies across London within the lending sector. And over the past few months, they've had to have a real shift in focus, which has left them with a bit of technical debt, which they're now looking to tackle. Now, Will is going to give a quick introduction to Iwoca, run you through a bit about what they've been working on during the pandemic, and how they're now tackling technical debt that they've accumulated. As ever, this is a Q&A session and a great opportunity for you to ask as many questions as possible. The icon for the Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. So just pop your questions in there and myself and Will get through as many as possible. So let's crack on. Will, thanks very much for joining us this evening. How are you today?
Thanks very much, Jordan. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Very well. You're it's a bit of a hectic time over at Iwoca for you guys at the moment, I understand.
Yeah, it has been. Right, shall I crack on then?
Yeah, take it away.
Please do bear with me. I am more of a Google Meet person than a Zoom.
No worries at all.
But we'll see how that goes. Right, I should be sharing my screen.
Yeah, all good. Cool.
When Jordan asked if I wanted to give a presentation, I thought, that sounds like a great idea. We've done so much across the last few months at Iwoca, dealing with how the COVID crisis has impacted our customers and all the changes we've had to make. I think about technical debt quite a lot. As sort of anyone who works in tech in like a 10-year-old startup is going to, it's something that is pretty inescapable. But over the last few months, we've been forced into situations where we had to achieve certain things and take on levels of technical debt that we never really have considered in normal operation. So I thought that was a good thing to talk a little bit about. So I'm going to structure the talk mostly around technical debt. So sort of what is it, why you should avoid it, which is kind of simple enough, and why you should embrace it. I think technical debt is a really interesting one because it's something that pretty much everyone working in tech has heard of. And in fact, pretty much every developer will have tried to explain it to someone at some point. And whenever you do that, you kind of get stuck in this trap where you realize that it's a metaphor which lines up really, really badly with reality. But it's kind of encapsulated, the overall feeling is encapsulated by this diagram, where, if you've ever got the opportunity to start a brand new greenfield project, or maybe you're doing some of your own personal projects or something like that, the first few days, weeks, months go absolutely fantastically, and you achieve huge amounts, and you probably start thinking that you're an absolute genius developer that is clearly for some reason way better than everyone else. You can't understand how huge tech companies manage to have such big teams. Then over time, you start to realize that the more things you try and add on to your application, the more difficult it starts to get. You're constantly having to settle for things that aren't quite right. And it's all because you're adding to something that you never really knew exactly where it was going right from the beginning. And every time you want to add a new feature, you have to compromise with all of the work that you did before. So if I can just very quickly check the chat functionality in Zoom, how old does everyone think the phrase technical debt is, and when was it first introduced? I have no answers so far.
20 years, someone said in the Q&A section. Chetan.
20 years, 50 years, maybe 1950s. Yeah, so the earliest that I can find is from Ward Cunningham in this quote from 1992. So yeah, kind of in the middle of those guesses. So it's been around for a very long time. It's, yeah, sort of this idea that there's shortcuts that you can take while writing code that allow you to get some things out faster, but it's not going to reduce the amount of time that it takes you to deliver it overall, and to pay off the debt. And all the development that you do while you're waiting to pay off that debt will cost you interest. So every feature you try and put in when you haven't paid down the debt is going to take longer and longer. And then, yeah, sort of going for a quick Google image search, you end up with cartoons like this. And this is kind of an odd cartoon to me because, a lot of the way this house has been built really doesn't make much sense. These weren't necessarily decisions that were made just to get something out quickly. It's really more like the person who was building the house didn't have a clue what they were doing. So yeah, Uncle Bob disagrees with this. He says that a mess is not technical debt. His point is that, to stick with the analogy of debt, you sort of go into it knowingly. It should be used for situations where you knew exactly what the right thing to do was, but you rationally agreed on a different way of proceeding to allow you to achieve whatever your short-term goals were. But I think this is, I think the clarification between sort of making a mess, not really knowing what you're doing, and then sort of deliberately taking on technical debt is a useful one. But I don't think that it's really necessary to say that stuff done by accident isn't technical debt. Maybe if the metaphor is moving with the times, there's all sorts of people who get themselves in credit card debt without ever really realizing they're taking on debt while they're doing it. And Martin Fowler disagrees as well. I think this diagram of technical debt quadrants can be attributed to him. So he splits it into these two axes of whether what you're doing is reckless or prudent, and then deliberate versus accidental. So I'm guessing, with this, what he's going for is that, there's the good kind of debt on the prudent side, and the debt that he would suggest that you shouldn't take on at all on the left-hand side. But actually, what I want to do in this talk is make the case for why actually there's times where you want to dip into all of these quadrants of technical debt in order to achieve what you want to as a business. But first, why should you avoid it? So, sticking with metaphors, technical debt has compound interest. You know, you start with a problem, and you've got a short list of features that you need to achieve. You know, you really just want to sort of get something out there. You don't know how to properly model the domain. It's quite a tricky problem, but you can easily come up with something that fits for now. And then, you know, maybe you cut a bit of a corner. You didn't write enough of an abstraction between that underlying data model and the rest of your business logic. And then, you know, there's some new features you need to get live really, really quickly. So you decide to delay writing some unit tests. You did some quick manual tests and it worked. And then the lead developer for the team, who was keeping track of all of this debt and sort of was remembering the kind of small list of tasks that needed to be done to get it back to a sane, rational situation, gets hit by a bus, leaves, whatever. And then you realize that you didn't write any documentation. And this really is the point that you want to call up Jordan and ask if he's got any roles going, because the whole thing's a bit of a mess. Cool. But why should you embrace it? So I'm going to go through all of these quadrants and think about some of the times that you might want to actually dip into this situation. So first, reckless and deliberate. Sometimes you've just got to prototype something. So, you know, whenever I think the experience for a lot of startups these days is that you're trying to build the tech at the same time as you're trying to prove the business model. So the value in getting something out today versus tomorrow, especially during early stages of investigating a new product or feature, can be incredibly valuable, because the earlier you get it out there, the earlier you learn all the things you need to about the product, you do all the pivots you're going to do, and you settle down with something that you know, with the correct thing to build in the future. If you're calling it a prototype, don't be afraid to achieve the requirements in the quickest possible way. Go ahead, validate or demo the product. If you are building something this way in order to sort of demo it to win a bid or something like that, you're obviously playing with fire, but at the same time, there's no need to lose a bid to someone with less scruples than you. So if it's what you need to do as a business, then go ahead and do it. So yeah, by doing this, you learn more about future product features, and you get a chance to explore the technical challenges before you have to design your infrastructure properly. But the most important thing, if you are going to do this, is that you can't save this code. You need to throw it away and start from the beginning. I've got a question that's come in. What if we build and deploy it to meet the deadline / delivery and then go back and fix it with a more clean and precise solution? So yeah, I totally agree. But I think this is really the point of understanding at the outset when you decide to take this reckless approach. That's not something that's going to be that's going to be salvageable from a code perspective. The value you're getting is in the business and in your own understanding, but trying to morph that piece of code that you've only used for a short period of time to make these learnings is going to give you problems. So prudent and deliberate. So this is more like, if the whole website is down due to a bad deployment, for example, obviously it's pretty much anything goes when it comes to the code you write to get things working. Obviously that's going to be a short-term thing, and the first thing you do before you even start the RCA on that situation is to fix everything you did and move back to a safe state. Sometimes, you really need to refactor something, but it's really not a good time to do it. There's some features you need to get out. That's a clear situation where you're going to deliberately take yourself into debt, start paying the interest, and then get yourself out of it later. Temporary features. So any features that you need in a crisis like this, for example, and you know that in 3 to 6 months you're not going to need anymore, it's quite acceptable to bolt those on to the architecture in a way that doesn't support it really going forwards, if you know that you're not going to run into big problems before you're able to delete that code. And to steal the FedEx slogan, when it absolutely positively needs to be there overnight, sometimes you're in a critical position as a business and something really needs to get put out there. And this is all fine, but the most important thing you do in this case is to schedule removal of this debt. I've got several Slack reminders set up that ping me about once a month that says, hey, Will, there's this dreadful thing you did. Just to get this thing working, can you check if it's still being used and get that merge request reverted? Then there's reckless and accidental. So this is when no one actually has a clue what they're doing. So I've got a lot of sympathy for this. My background is in bioengineering. I'm very much an accidental developer, and I've spent a lot of my career so far really learning as I was going along, and I've spent the second part of my career so far rewriting all of the stuff that I did before, because it was an absolute mess. You can't really avoid this kind of tech debt. It would be great if everyone could make sure that they started their startup with loads of super experienced developers, but they're really expensive. And it still provides business value. You can still solve problems. You're just putting a cap on how big everything can get. And obviously you're building up a load of debt. So you get business value, you learn through your own mistakes, and also you learn about the business by getting something out quickly in sort of the same way as a prototype. But what you really end up with is your code being a liability instead of an asset. You're still proving your business case, you're learning a lot about the domain, you're putting yourself in a much better position to write the right code. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a really long and painful process to get yourself out of this state and move the code into a state that can support a much bigger dev team working more professionally. Luckily, or unfortunately rather, the Dunning-Kruger rule means that if you think you're doing it, you probably aren't really that bad at it. And it's more that if you think that somehow you're a 10x developer with 2 years experience, you're probably actually making an absolute mess, which is going to cost you a lot in the long term. Prudent and accidental. So this is when new information invalidates your plans and assumptions. So yeah, this is where you started with the wrong data model, You had some assumptions about the way the product was going to develop, and actually they changed. The business has pivoted, and you have to try and use the same code base that has lots of good features in it still to do something slightly different. This is often mitigated by good development practices. So if you've built in enough layers into your software and the interfaces are clear enough, then it can be much easier to get out of this trouble, because you're able to sort of focus on the areas that are broken without risking breaking the features that you want. Unit tests as well, obviously. Can be avoided by prototyping. And honestly, in the worst cases, this can be as painful as the reckless and accidental prototyping. Sometimes, when if there's a really big pivot and you've only got some subset of your features that you want to continue, you should really consider throwing everything away and writing stuff from scratch if you have the benefit of that much time. So bad omens. So these are situations where you're probably taking on some technical debt. You receive a spec from someone in the business that only discusses happy paths. Probably means that what you've got is something that they've only kind of thought through the main cases, and you're going to have to sniff out what should happen in the obvious logical edge cases that the business might not even have encountered yet. Very similar, you're trying to automate an undocumented process. So again, like same sort of thing, and something we see quite a lot. There's been something that someone has done the whole time. It seems pretty repetitive, so you're trying to automate it, but they're not able to provide a full list of all of the logic. And actually, while what they're doing 90% of the time is very repetitive, there's a few times where they're using their own deliberation. Again, you're going to wander into some painful edge cases. You just picked up a piece of undocumented code. The code might be great, but if you misinterpret the design choices that were made and you take yourself down the wrong path, you're going to run into, you're going to start seeing things that you call bugs that were actually just you when you took ownership of the piece of code, misunderstanding the way it was supposed to evolve. And again, obviously the business pivots and you're left with something that was definitely not built for the direction you're now going in. So yeah, finally, I thought I'd go through a couple of things that we've experienced at Iwoca in the last few months whilst trying to help our customers and recover from the crisis. I did consider going through a lot more of the timeline. We've done an awful lot of pivots and worked weekends only to suddenly change what we were trying to achieve on very, very short notice. And I'm happy to go into that if anyone has any specific questions about CBILS or BBLS loans and what we're doing to support it, but didn't really fit into the story. So I just got these two examples. But first, who are we? So Iwoca has about 300 people in it. Within the product tech and analytics team, it's about 100. I tried to split it out into some various groups and it doesn't quite add up to 100, but I'm sure it's close enough. So yeah, 30 back-end developers, half as many front-end developers, product design and research, some delivery managers and data scientists and analysts. What do we do? So we provide finance to small businesses that are traditionally underserved by the big banks. So this means that we're able to identify businesses with good prospects at a much earlier stage than banks are able to, so we can lend to earlier stage businesses. And yeah, anyone that has a business model that banks struggle to understand. A lot of sort of the early niches of Iwoca was sort of lending to eBay sellers and later Amazon sellers, where we could build models that would have a good appreciation of how these businesses worked and the credit risk, but that the banks would really struggle to underwrite. What's the team working on? So there's loads of third-party data sources that we have some integrations with. Open banking, but that's not the only way we pull in bank statement data. We can accept PDF bank statements, and we're able to pass the bank statements from any major bank and pull the transactions from them or automatically. Credit bureaus, all sorts of other things. We make instant credit decisions, so taking that data feed, doing the feature engineering and running models to make credit decisions in real time. And then, yeah, payments, obviously, the reconciliation of all of the loan book. We build a lot of our own CRM in-house. In fact, we actually built our own phone system as well because we couldn't find anything that really fitted our requirements. And we also have an API that allows our partners to integrate with us, and they can have any amount of the customer journey on their own platform that they want. So we've got some people who just send us leads, and some businesses like Tide, where the entire product is accessed from within their app. How do we do it? Everyone needs a logo page when they do one of these talks, right? I don't know, there's only so many logos you can get on. There's an awful lot going on at Iwoca, but generally speaking, the main service is a Django monolith with a Postgres database. We use GitLab for managing all of our merge requests and CI, all on AWS, and most of our front-end projects are built using React. So anyway, if you are a small business lender, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen? Well, it's pretty much what did happen. There's been a lot of businesses that have struggled over the past few months, but obviously we've been in a situation where not only do we struggle to originate new loans and bring on new customers, but a lot of our customers are in a situation where they can't pay us back, or at least they can't stick to the agreed repayment schedule. So the first thing we had to do was deal with the fact that many thousand people, all with an upcoming repayment that they couldn't make. You would be surprised if you're not sort of familiar with how small businesses work, how tight and carefully crafted the cash flow is for the business. In fact, that's where our product comes in. If you close a restaurant for a week, it can start being unable to meet its commitments. So we've got a huge number of people who are calling in to ask for forbearance on their loan. Now, without going into too much detail, the way we issue loans to small businesses is that we have to take on debt facilities ourselves. So the money we're lending out isn't our equity, it's money that's been specifically borrowed for the purpose of making these loans. And this money isn't just a blank check with its own repayment schedule. There's very strict rules related to the underlying loans that it's for that we need to adhere to. So we're not able to just say, yeah, okay, guys, it's fine. Everyone take 1, 2, 3 months off from repayments. we have to very strictly understand exactly what situation everyone is in, and then put them on the arrangement that's right for them, so that we can then have the negotiation with our lenders to do that. So we've got this very manual process suddenly under a huge amount of pressure. We're getting new definitions and requirements from this ongoing negotiation with our lender day by day about, how we should be classing different customers and how we should be classing the arrangements we're putting them in. And we need to somehow help to automate this process as quickly as possible. But to be honest, the collections process is at the very end of our value chain. It's not something we've spent a huge amount of time on, and we're already suffering from a little bit of technical debt there. So the data structure for arrangements is a poor reflection of reality. For example, it was only really designed to be a one-way thing. Most of the time, when you start going very overdue on one of our loans, you sort of pass into the collections process, and it's one way. We're not going to be able to lend to you again. But obviously in this situation where you're trying to provide temporary forbearance, you want to make sure that these customers don't end up with a permanent black mark. It's tightly coupled to critical infrastructure, unfortunately. So it's not really possible to quickly fix these underlying problems before we continue with the new features we need. And warning sign, we've got a really badly documented manual process that we're suddenly trying to automate. And what we're trying to do is help customers, instead of just calling us up, fill in forms giving details of the situation they're currently in, calculating what is an affordable repayment or otherwise for them, and then classifying that for the purposes of our lenders and implementing that in sort of the core infrastructure that is determining whose card we charge when. So what do we do? So we kind of just layered everything on top. We couldn't change the underlying data model, but we could add the new fields that we wanted. This is pretty painful debt, because if we ever forget this context, we end up with this weird chimera data structure, which people are going to find very difficult to interpret and really understand where we were trying to go. But hopefully it's something that if we do manage to resolve it in the short term, won't be too painful. All of the forms for the customer to fill in, again, they're changing really quickly. We don't really have, we're free to build something new here. So we go for more of a prototype model. We just get something out there that works. Remember correctly, it didn't work particularly well for mobile users. But that's how things go. And then that's something that when we come to implement it properly, we'll be looking to completely delete. So we leave a clear separation between this prototype and the rest of the existing code. And then, we were able to process several thousand customers with what would previously been a process of calling a team of about 10 people quite successfully, and get them all on a repayment schedule that we've been able to work with them over time to get them back on track as the UK has started to reopen. And I have slightly got ahead of myself. We automated the process. We now have a much better understanding of what's actually needed. So all of that undocumented manual process, we've now helped throw up all of the problems with it. And when we tackle it properly again in the future, we will be able to do it better. And whilst the cleanup while the amount of tech work required in total is undoubtedly going to be higher, the amount of business requirement uncertainty that we've removed by taking this approach might actually mean that we end up with the better piece of work at the end of it. So yeah, then there was the big one from which I borrowed the slightly clickbaity title. One of the things we needed to do was to allow our existing customers to take out a brand new CBILS loan, which is the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is a government guarantee scheme that we've been accredited for, that allows us to claim a 80% guarantee on loans that we make to businesses in this period, so that we're able to help them keep afloat. But what we're not able to help them pay off their existing loan at the same time. So what we need to do is enable them to have two balances with us side by side. So we've always, we've been talking about this at Iwoca for a long time. It's the strategic direction we're moving in, but it was still something that we'd mostly talked about and not really implemented. So this is a very vague diagram of what we're talking about doing. At the moment, we have all of these tables: cash flows, loan agreements, repayment schedules, and arrangements, all with a foreign key to our user table, which between them build up the concepts of a balance and a repayment schedule and their account with us. And what we want to do is introduce this new many-to-one relationship in the account table, such that a single authenticated user, a single person who has like a name and a business name and all of the credit analysis we've done and all of that side of our data model, just to add another layer of abstraction so that they can have multiple accounts with us. But again, the problem is that this is not at all how this area of the code base was initially envisioned when it was written 10 years ago. It's way too tightly coupled to the underlying active record models in Django. And the amount of very important code that we have to change as we change what all of these queries look like is really quite painful. So this piece of work was honestly scoped at about 6 months. It feeds into all of our reporting to our investors and lenders, all of our business reporting, everything that issues loans and takes repayments. It's the most sensitive code we have. So we did pretty much the worst thing you can imagine. We just copied and pasted everything. We took all the features that we needed in order to issue the loans, which is actually a reasonably small subset of the total features. The CBILS loans have 12-month repayment holidays, so we don't need to support taking repayments from anyone just yet. They've all got 12-month interest-free periods paid for by the government. So again, we don't have to manage any of that. So we really just need to get people to the point of funding, send the money out of the door, and obviously reconcile it correctly. And this was something we were able to do in a couple of weeks. But yeah, where do we go from here? So what we've actually done, and I'm not going to try and show a diagram with this because it just turns into spaghetti at this point, but we've actually created a third set of tables in the original schema that we wanted, that have foreign keys to the first and second tables. So every row in either the first or second tables has a row in the third set of tables that foreign keys to it. So we synchronize the data so that we've got this identical source of truth reflected in both sets of tables. We double check that by running some integrity tests. So we use Celery every 4 hours. We run a few queries on the database and check that there's no disagreements between these tables. And then where we'll go from here is to move the references over one by one. And the really interesting point here for me is we've actually done something very similar to this before, where we wanted to move from just offering someone one offer of a loan to actually giving them multiple different offers side by side. We had a really similar problem where we had to change an underlying data structure that was accessed from all over the code base. And one of the things we really struggled with there, not so much in a sort of a raw technical manner, but more of a sort of social and behavioral situation, is that there was nothing wrong with the old data model at the time we were asking people to make this change. So, it was impossible to get to the top of the product manager's prioritization list because, all they were really doing was being a blocker for us moving on with the tech debt. They didn't get anything out of it until every single product manager had done it. And then suddenly we were able to start offering these multiple offers at the same time. So the advantage of this situation is that there's already data in the new data model. So all of the old reports simply are missing part of the new loans data, which is a problem by itself. But it means that all of these individual teams now actually have their own motivation to go and move to this new third set of tables data structure, which is where we want to go. And we think it's going to be much, much easier to get out of this situation and finally pay down this tech debt. Right, that's the end of my talk. I went over a little bit, sorry Jordan, but I can start to go through some of the questions. I don't think we have a huge number, but I will start with...
Yeah, I think you've got a couple in the chat, and then you've got one that's just come on.
Yeah.
In the queue.
What happens if top management are driven just by milestones? Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, that comes back to, it'd be better if I stop showing my screen at this point. That sort of comes back to that initial idea of why so many developers are familiar with this term. It's because it's something you have to explain to management an awful lot. From my experiences at Iwoca, no one believes it at first. If you've got someone who hasn't worked with tech teams before, they're not going to believe the true cost of tech debt until they've really experienced this kind of problem. It's a very difficult one to explain. But again, I think the point I'd like to make today is that it can be on you as a developer as well. There's loads of cases where it really is worth taking on the tech debt. At the end of the day, you just need to try and get all of the information in somebody's head that is the decision maker, and they need to make the call. And if you're being put in a situation where you've explained the problem of the tech debt and you've been overruled and they've said, like, we just need to do this anyway, and then further down the line you're being blamed for being slow and not being able to get anything else done before it's paid down, that's on them. But I would really encourage everyone to try and facilitate getting stuff done as much as possible. Speaking as someone who works for a lending company, sometimes it is right to take on debt to get where you need to go, because if the money stops coming in, then you're never going to get to the tech nirvana you wanted to be in at the end of the day anyway. At Iwoca, do good practices and procedures come from the top level guys, or anyone from the team have a voice in it? How far do you think in providing services to your clients to avoid these kinds of pandemic situations in the future, or steps to implement and sustain these kinds of situations? Yeah, so Where does it come from? Again, it's about finding out who has that information. Absolutely, it is down to the developer who is working on a feature to explain what the situation is with the tech debt. A manager is not going to know innately themselves. You don't have this sort of little calculator where you say, I said just get it done 3 times, therefore this time I have to say that's fine, take a week off and sort out the tech debt. It really needs to be a constant communication. So like, do the good practices and procedures come from the top level guys? I think it's on management to promote the concept of increased professionalism, and to make sure that it's clear that it's that it is something that is considered valuable to the business to improve the practices of what's going on in the team. But certainly at Iwoca, when it comes to actually working out what we should do, it's much better if there's someone within the team who's pushing for it themselves. So it's on me to say that we're willing to spend time and effort and money on getting the code base to a better situation. But it really takes people within the team who are passionate about deleting 3,000 lines of legacy code, or setting up linting tools and stuff like that, and giving talks and teaching other people, what it is, ways in which we can improve the way we work. How far do you think in providing services to your clients to avoid these kinds of situations? I would love to say that we saw this coming, but I don't think many people really can. We always expected, because a lot of our loan book is, our core product is very short term, it's only 12 months, and it's quite rare that macroeconomic conditions would put a huge number of our customers in a really bad situation. Like, that's something that evolves over the course of some time, and you generally see it coming. Well, I'm not sure anyone who's been caught in any financial crisis would say they felt it coming, but it's certainly better to have a 12-month loan in these kinds of situations than a 5-year loan. We are definitely very keen to help our customers. It's an interesting situation being an alternative lender like us compared to a bank, which obviously owns all of the money themselves. Our job is, I hate to say it, but somewhat like a middleman. We take money from institutional investors, and there's attributes of things they want to invest in. So they want to be able to control the risk in certain ways. They want to, a good example, there's all sorts of things the institutional investors want, and there's all sorts of things that the small businesses want. And it's on us to craft a product that somehow manages to make everyone happy at the same time. So we're able to facilitate the sort of macroeconomic flow of capital from these investors to the people who can deploy it to make more money in the economy, whilst making sure that everyone sees kind of the product that they want to see. And a good example of this is overdrafts. An overdraft is a terrible financial product for an investor, because you approve everyone for a credit limit, and then they don't take it, and you get no money whatsoever. And then everything goes wrong. Everyone draws down their overdraft and immediately defaults. So you're in the situation where you're taking on all of the risk, but you're not getting the profit from the interest coming in, which is why you'll see a lot of business overdrafts have setup fees and arrangement fees where you're paying just to have it there as a safety net. We don't do that at Iwoca. We try and have a very, but what what we do is we reassess customers every 30 days when they want to continue to draw down on the product. So we make this very seamless and very smooth for the customers, but it does enable us to have a check in place for when things start to go wrong. That means that we can help our customers avoid taking on debt that they're not going to be able to service. Because obviously, you know, a lot of small businesses are in an impossible situation right now. And what they really needed to do was step back, realize what was going on, and not go ahead and bet the house on it. What are we going to do about it in future? We definitely got some learnings from across the business in this sort of round of negotiations and the way we've had to flex. I don't really have, you know, we're definitely feeding it into our new product development and trying to build new products that will feel more safe and secure to small business owners that are worried of being put in this situation again. I can't go into exactly what they are right now, unfortunately, but it is definitely something that we're trying to learn from. Right, I'm getting there. Scheduling tech debt removal for startups and new products. What signs would you look for to determine if a prototype / initial product has run its course and you need to start building a new long-term product from scratch? That's a tricky one. I really think you need to draw up some red lines at the beginning where you say, you know, okay, we can build it like this and it will do this. And it's not saying we won't add any more features onto it again, but it will never do these things because these are the features that we are making difficult to achieve by the design choices we're making in the way we're going. So, for example, you know, our CRM strategy at Iwoca is generally to build things in-house. When I joined 5 years ago, we were using Salesforce, and it's not to say that Salesforce was incapable of supporting our needs, but due to the ways we were using it, it was incredibly expensive, and fixing it would have required hiring very expensive Salesforce consultants. As we come up with new teams wanting to do new things, and you know, it's not supported in our own internal CRM, we do take a stance where, you know, we will go and buy some external CRM. We will, you know, do some basic integrations with our systems, things like managing unsubscribes and stuff like that, which is obviously both important and an absolute nightmare. But we're never going to deeply integrate it with our core platform. When it comes to the point where that's what we need to achieve the next round of features, we've got to completely ditch the external system and build those features in, because we've been caught in situations where bi-directional syncs between CRM platforms has got us in a lot of pain. Cool. Was that? I don't know what the answer live button does, but I guess that one's been moved to answered. Fairly new to Python and Django. Only started using it a couple of months ago. I'm looking to kickstart my career. Don't have any experience in the real programming world. Advice to a newbie. Yeah, I totally. That really resonates with me. When I joined Iwoca, I had spent about 2 weeks playing with Python in total. I had never done any kind of web development. I'd never even used Linux. And the job ad said that I was going to be doing analysis in Excel, but startup life, that really didn't happen. I think if you're trying to get into development as someone who hasn't got a clue what's going on. I think there's sort of two different avenues you can go down. You can try going for a more established company that's going to have clear onboarding processes and will be able to teach you what you need to know as you go through the process. And good companies hiring graduates like that will hopefully be looking for sort of more innate talent than skills that you already have. But it's a bit hit and miss there. Or you can go the startup route. If you've got an affinity for understanding real business requirements and you're able to sort of be a one-man build team, even if your development skills are nascent, you will be put in a situation where you can take on a lot of responsibility. You'll be able to do a lot of trial and error, and you have the potential to learn very, very quickly there. But you're also taking on a lot more risk because if you can't get your head around it, it's there's much less of a safety net. Will a recession put a financial burden on Iwoca in providing the services to its clients? So our real USP is underwriting. So being able to understand the risks of different businesses and being able to flex that process much more quickly than banks who have sort of a very distributed underwriting process where it's sort of difficult to change their policies. I think in a much shallower recession than what we've seen in the last 3 to 4 months, we'll be in a position to continually pick businesses with good prospects. There'll obviously be even more shortage of credit from traditional sources, which will increase opportunities for us even more. I think, I think we're definitely not at existential risk of what is going on. It's obviously been a pretty nasty shock and quite a lot of disruption to our business. But yes, we generally built the business to be very resilient and to be in a position to seize the opportunity in traditional recession models. The speed and the impact that this crisis has had is pretty unprecedented, and it's caused us more problems than we'd normally expect to have. Right. Have I done it, Jordan?
Yeah, perfect. I think you've nailed everything there. I think, really appreciate your time, Will. I think there's been a lot to take away, and it's great to sort of learn more about how businesses have been challenged and how they've overcome challenges and how they're working through the challenges that they're facing during this pandemic. So, I really appreciate you giving an open and honest review on how your last couple of months have been. I'm sure it's been incredibly hectic and is going to continue to be incredibly hectic for the next 3, 4, 5 months, probably longer. So, really appreciate your time, Will. Thanks for giving a talk. I just wanted to thank everyone as well for joining the webinar today. Thanks for obviously popping all your questions in the box. And I think Will's managed to cover every single question off, which is great. If you did take something away today, then please feel free to leave a comment or give Amicus Recruitment a like, or the live series page that we have. Obviously, give Iwoca a big like as well, and connect with Will if you do have any further questions. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer anything after this. Keep your eye out for other future webinars as well, and I'll speak to you soon. Again, Will, thanks for your time. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your hectic week to give a good talk today.
Thank you.
No worries. Cheers, guys.